Brooklyn, New York, August 1979. The heat was suffocating, the kind that makes the asphalt bubble and turns the city into an oven. In CANARSIE, in the industrial wasteland near JFK Airport, Paul Vario sat in his junkyard office on Avenue D, sweating through his shirt, making decisions that would lead to the deaths of 31 people over the course of 4 days. This is the story of the CANARSIE bloodbath, the worst mass killing in New York mob history. A massacre so brutal, so methodical, so completely unnecessary that even the hardened FBI agents who investigated it couldn't understand what had driven Paul Vario, a capo known for his business sense and strategic thinking, to order the systematic execution of 36 people. They call it Vario's purge. And once you understand what happened in those 4 days in August of '79, you'll understand why Paul Vario's name became synonymous, not with the Lufthansa heist or the Goodfellas movie, but with one of the most savage examples of mob violence in American history. Paul Vario was born on July 10, 1914, in Brooklyn. Grew up in Basin. Sicilian parents, 5 brothers, poverty, the usual immigrant story. But Paul was different from his brothers. He was smart, strategic, understood that organized crime wasn't just about muscle and intimidation. It was about control, about building systems, about making money efficiently. By 1962, at age 48, Paul Vario was a made man in the Lucchese crime family. By the time he was released from a brief prison stint that same year, he'd been promoted to caporegime, captain. He ran his own crew out of Brooklyn, CANARSIE specifically, a junkyard on Avenue D, an old German bar called Geffken's on Flatlands Avenue. Vario's operation was legendary. He controlled hijacking operations at JFK Airport. His crew, led by Irish gangster Jimmy Burke, stole millions from cargo shipments. They had union connections that let them threaten strikes if anyone investigated too closely. The FBI later captured mob conversations where Lucchese members boasted, "We own JFK." That was Vario's doing. He also controlled all illegal gambling in East New York and parts of Brooklyn. Every bookmaker, every numbers game, every card room. If you ran a gambling operation in Vario's territory, you paid him tribute. It was estimated he made $25,000 a day. That's over $150,000 in today's money, every single day. But Vario was careful, low profile. He lived modestly, drove regular cars, dressed simply, presented himself as a florist because he owned a flower shop. The FBI knew what he was. Everyone knew. But proving it was another matter. By August of 1979, Paul Vario was 65 years old. He'd been running his crew for 17 years. He'd survived multiple investigations, multiple indictments. He'd orchestrated the Lufthansa heist 9 months earlier in December of '78. $5 million in cash, nearly $1 million in jewelry. The biggest cash robbery in American history at that time. But the Lufthansa heist had created problems, big problems. Jimmy Burke, who'd planned and executed the robbery, had started killing everyone involved, systematically eliminating witnesses. Bodies were turning up all over New York. The heat was intense. FBI, NYPD, everyone was looking at Vario's crew. And then there was Henry Hill, Vario's protege, the kid he'd mentored since Hill was 16. Henry had been dealing drugs, cocaine, heroin. This violated mob rules. Vario had specifically told his crew, no drugs, too much attention, too much risk. But Henry and Jimmy Burke had ignored him. By summer of '79, Vario was facing multiple problems simultaneously. The Lufthansa investigation, Burke's murder spree, creating more heat, Henry Hill's drug dealing, and something else. Something that would trigger the massacre. A power struggle within the Lucchese family. The boss, Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo, was getting pressure from other families, the Gambinos specifically. They wanted a piece of the JFK operations, wanted access to the cargo, wanted to muscle in on Vario's territory. Corallo, trying to maintain peace between families, suggested to Vario that maybe they could share, let the Gambinos have some access, split the profits. Paul Vario said no, absolutely not. He'd built those operations. Those were his connections, his union contacts, his system. The Gambinos could fuck off. This created tension. The Lucchese administration didn't like being defied by a capo. Corallo sent word through intermediaries. This wasn't a suggestion. This was an order. Accommodate the Gambinos or face consequences. Vario still refused, and that's when he started to hear whispers, rumors, that Corallo was considering replacing him as capo, that maybe his brother Vito Tuddy Vario would take over the crew, that Paul was becoming a liability. For a man who'd spent his entire life building an empire, who'd made millions for the Lucchese family, who'd run the most profitable crew in the organization, this was unacceptable, intolerable, an insult that demanded a response. But Paul Vario wasn't impulsive. He didn't make rash decisions. He thought it through, calculated the angles, and he came to a conclusion that would lead to 31 deaths. If the Lucchese administration was going to replace him, if they were going to take his operation and give pieces of it to the Gambinos, then he'd make sure there was nothing left to take. He'd burn it all down, eliminate every potential successor, every soldier who might work for whoever replaced him, every loose end that could testify against him. He'd leave scorched earth. On August 15, 1979, Paul Vario called a meeting. His inner circle: Jimmy Burke, Angelo Seppi, Louis Cafora, Frank Manzo, his most trusted soldiers and associates. 11 men total. He told them the situation, told them about the pressure from Corallo, about the Gambinos trying to muscle in, about the threat to replace him. And then he told them what they were going to do. They were going to eliminate everyone in the crew who wasn't in that room, everyone who might flip, everyone who knew too much, everyone who could be used by whoever replaced him. Jimmy Burke, who'd already been killing Lufthansa witnesses for months, didn't hesitate. He was in. Angelo Seppi, a violent enforcer who'd killed before, agreed. One by one, the men in that room committed to Vario's plan. They made a list. 23 names, soldiers and associates in Vario's crew who weren't essential, who knew about operations but weren't running them, who could potentially become witnesses or work for a new capo. 23 men who were about to die because Paul Vario had decided that if he was going down, he was taking everyone with him. The killing started on August 17th. The first targets were the Lufthansa crew, the few who were still alive. Vario and Burke reasoned that the FBI was close to breaking the case anyway. Better to eliminate those witnesses now. Marty Krugman, a bookie who'd helped set up the heist. He'd been nervous, talking too much, drinking too much. Jimmy Burke invited him for a meeting. Krugman never came back. His body was never found. Richard Eaton, a con man who'd worked with the crew, knew details about the heist. Burke lured him to a meeting, shot him, buried him, 2 dead. But Vario wasn't satisfied with just the Lufthansa witnesses. He wanted a complete purge, wanted to eliminate anyone who could potentially damage him. August 18th, 4 soldiers in Vario's crew were called to a meeting at a warehouse in CANARSIE. They thought it was about new hijacking operations. Instead, they walked into an execution. Jimmy Burke and Angelo Seppi with shotguns, all 4 dead in under a minute. 6 bodies now. August 19th, the killing accelerated. Vario's men spread out across Brooklyn and Queens, hunting targets, using the same playbook. Call them for a meeting, ambush them, kill them, dispose of the bodies. 3 bookmakers who worked for Vario, called to the junkyard on Avenue D, never left. 7 bodies in a stolen truck, driven to a construction site in Queens. Buried under concrete that was being poured for a new building foundation. 9 dead. A numbers runner who'd been skimming. Vario had known about it for months, but hadn't acted. Now, he did. The runner was found in his apartment, shot 6 times. Left there for his family to find. 10 dead. 2 truck drivers who worked the JFK hijacking operations. They knew too much about the cargo routes, about the union connections, about how the system worked. Burke considered them loose ends. They were found in a stolen car in a long-term parking lot at JFK. Both shot in the head. 12 dead. But the killing wasn't just about eliminating witnesses or potential informants. It was about sending a message. About showing the Lucchese administration and the Gambinos what happened when you tried to take what Paul Vario had built. August 20th. A bar in Ozone Park that paid protection to Vario. The owner had mentioned to someone that maybe if there was new management, maybe if the Gambinos took over, things might run differently. Word got back to Vario. Angelo Sepe and 2 other men went to the bar that night. After closing, the owner was there with his brother and a bartender. All 3 were beaten to death with baseball bats. The bar was set on fire. The bodies burned beyond recognition. 15 dead. A loan shark who worked for Vario. He'd been in the business for 20 years, knew where all the bodies were buried. Literally and figuratively, knew about Vario's connections, his operations, his secrets. Vario called him personally, asked him to come to Geffken's bar, just the 2 of them, a private conversation. The loan shark arrived at 9 p.m. Vario was waiting. So were Jimmy Burke and Frank Manzo. They tortured him for 3 hours, wanted to know if he'd talked to anyone, FBI, NYPD, other families, wanted to be sure he hadn't been cooperating. The loan shark swore he hadn't, begged for his life, said he'd been loyal for 2 decades. Vario shot him anyway, left his body in the bar, called his brother Vito to clean it up. 16 dead. The purge continued. August 21st, 3 more associates, all killed for knowing too much, for being potential weaknesses, for existing in Paul Vario's orbit at a time when he'd decided that anyone outside his inner circle was expendable. Offense who moved stolen goods from the JFK hijackings, shot while loading a truck. A corrupt airport worker who provided information about cargo shipments, found dead in his car outside his house in Queens. A taxi dispatcher who'd been on Vario's payroll for a decade, disappeared. Body never found. 19 dead. But Paul Vario made a miscalculation. A terrible miscalculation that would be his undoing. One of the men on his kill list was Paulie Mazza, a soldier in the crew, 38 years old, made man for 12 years. Paulie had been loyal, had done good work, but he'd also been close to some of the Lufthansa crew. New details was too much of a risk. What Vario didn't know was that Paulie Mazza had a cousin, Salvatore Mazza, Sally, and Sally was a made man in the Gambino family. When Paulie Mazza disappeared on August 20th, when his wife called Sally crying saying Paulie hadn't come home, Sally started asking questions, started putting pieces together, started realizing that something was very wrong in the Vario crew. Sally went to his capo went to the Gambino administration, and suddenly the Gambino family was paying very close attention to what was happening in CANARSIE. August 22nd. Vario's men grabbed 2 more targets, both associates, both killed, both disposed of. 21 dead. That same day, Gambino soldiers started watching the Vario crew, following them, documenting their movements, and they noticed something. Vario's people were hunting, moving with purpose. Body going to specific locations, coming back without whoever they'd been looking for. The Gambinos realized what was happening. Paul Vario was conducting a purge, killing his own people. And one of those people was connected to their family. Paul Castellano, the Gambino boss, called for a sit-down, demanded a meeting with Tony Corallo. Wanted to know what the fuck was happening with the Lucchese crew in Brooklyn. Corallo didn't know. He'd heard rumors about bodies, about missing people. But he hadn't connected it to Vario's crew, hadn't realized the scale of what was happening. Castellano told him, said that one of the victims was related to a Gambino soldier, said that Vario was out of control, said that if the Lucchese family didn't handle this, the Gambinos would. That was a threat. And Corallo knew it. On August 23rd, Corallo sent his underboss, Salvatore, Tom Mix Santoro, to Brooklyn, to confront Vario, to find out what was happening, to stop it if necessary. Santoro arrived at the junkyard with 4 soldiers, armed, ready for trouble. Paul Vario met him in the office. Santoro demanded to know what was going on, why bodies were turning up all over Brooklyn, why Gambino-connected people were being killed. Vario's response was defiant. He said he was cleaning house, eliminating liabilities, protecting his operation, protecting the family. Santoro told him to stop immediately, said the heat was too intense, said the Gambinos were threatening war, said Corallo was furious. Vario refused, said he'd finish what he started, said there were still names on his list, still people who needed to be eliminated. That's when Santoro pulled his gun, told Vario he was done, that the purge ended now, that if Vario killed one more person, Santoro would kill him. They stared at each other. Vario was 65 years old, had been in the life for over 40 years, had built an empire. And now his own family was threatening him, holding a gun on him in his own office. He backed down, told Santoro the killing was over, that he'd stop. Santoro left, reported back to Corallo, said Vario had agreed to stop, but both men knew this wasn't over, that Vario had crossed too many lines, that there would be consequences. The final count from Vario's purge, 23 people dead, all members or associates of his crew, all killed over the course of 6 days. All because Paul Vario decided that destroying his own operation was preferable to letting someone else run it. But the purge didn't save him, didn't protect him. It did the opposite. The FBI, which had been investigating the Lufthansa heist and Burke's murder spree, suddenly had a pattern. Bodies connected to Vario's crew, disappearances, witnesses, gone, end quote, end quote. The investigation intensified. Henry Hill, who'd been dealing drugs and facing serious prison time, saw what was happening, saw his friends and associates disappearing, realized he was probably on the list. In May of 1980, facing life in prison on drug charges, Henry Hill became a cooperating witness. His testimony devastated Paul Vario and his crew. Hill knew everything. 40 years of criminal activity, names, dates, crimes, operations. He gave it all to the FBI. In 1984, Paul Vario was convicted of fraud, helping Henry Hill get early parole through a no-show job, 4 years in prison. In 1985, he was convicted of extortion, 10 more years. At age 71, Paul Vario was going to die in prison. He did. May 3, 1988. Respiratory failure. Federal prison in Fort Worth, Texas. Age 73. Jimmy Burke was convicted of multiple murders. Life sentence. Died in prison in 1996. Angelo Sepe was killed in 1984. Shot by unknown gunmen, probably revenge for the purge. Most of Vario's inner circle ended up dead or in prison. The crew was destroyed. The operation dismantled. And the 23 people killed in the August purge remained mostly unknown. The FBI knew about some of them, had connected some disappearances to the Vario crew. But many of the bodies were never found. Many of the victims were never officially connected to the purge. The CANARSIE bloodbath, as it became known in FBI files, was never prosecuted as a single crime. The victims were scattered. The evidence was mostly Henry Hill's testimony. And by the time Hill was cooperating, many of the killers were already dead or in prison for other crimes. But the massacre happened. 23 people murdered over 6 days, all on Paul Vario's orders, all because he couldn't accept that his empire was ending, that his time was done, that the organization he'd served for decades was moving on without him. This is the part of the Goodfellas story that the movie doesn't tell. Martin Scorsese's film shows Paul Vario, renamed Paul Cicero and played by Paul Sorvino, as a calm, strategic boss. A father figure to Henry Hill, a man who ran his operation with discipline and intelligence. That was true. For decades, that was Paul Vario. But in August of 1979, faced with the possibility of losing everything, the real Paul Vario showed what he was capable of. And it was monstrous. The victims of the purge deserved to be remembered, not as mob associates who got what was coming to them, as people, as humans, with families and lives. Marty Krugman, 50 years old, a bookie and a gambler, annoying and paranoid. But he had a wife, had children, disappeared, and was never seen again. Richard Eaton, 46, a con man, but also someone's son, someone's friend, killed and buried in an unmarked grave. The 4 soldiers killed in the warehouse. Their names lost to history, young men, mostly, in their 20s and 30s, killed because they knew too much, because they were convenient targets, because Paul Vario decided they were expendable. The 3 bookmakers, the numbers runner, the truck drivers, the bar owner and his brother and the bartender, the loan shark, the fence, the airport worker, the taxi dispatcher. Every single one of them had lives, had people who cared about them, had futures that were stolen. Paulie Mazza, the made man whose death brought the Gambinos' attention, 38 years old, married, 2 kids. His family never got his body, never got closure. Just the knowledge that he disappeared one night and never came home. 23 people, 23 lives, 23 families destroyed, all because Paul Vario, the calm, strategic, business-minded capo, decided that if he was going down, he'd take everyone else with him. The lesson here, if there is one, is about the true nature of organized crime. The movies and TV shows glamorize it, make it seem like honor and loyalty and family. Make the mobsters seem like anti-heroes, complex characters with moral codes. But the reality is different. The reality is Paul Vario, in August of '79, a 65-year-old man who'd made millions off other people's labor and fear, who'd spent decades building a criminal empire, and when that empire was threatened, when his position was challenged, he murdered 23 people, his own crew, people who'd been loyal to him, people who'd made him rich. He killed them not because they'd betrayed him, not because they deserved it, but because they were convenient scapegoats, because eliminating them served his purposes, because he could. That's the truth about the mob, not the Goodfellas version, the real version, the version where Paul Vario orders the systematic execution of his own people and dies in prison unrepentant. The FBI estimate is 23 confirmed victims of Vario's August purge, but there may have been more. Bodies that were never found, disappearances that were never connected. The true number could be 30, could be 40. We'll probably never know. What we do know is that in 6 days in August of 1979, Paul Vario's crew conducted one of the most brutal purges in mob history, and they got away with it. Most of the killers were never prosecuted specifically for those murders. Most of the victims were never officially acknowledged. The CANARSIE bloodbath happened in the shadows, in warehouses and bars and apartments across Brooklyn, Bodies were buried in construction sites, dumped in the ocean, dissolved in acid. Hidden so well that even decades later, families don't have remains to bury. That's Paul Vario's real legacy. Not the Lufthansa heist, not his portrayal in Goodfellas, but 23 murders committed in a desperate attempt to maintain power. To punish the organization that was moving past him, to leave nothing behind for his successors. He succeeded in that, at least. By the time he died in prison in '88, the Vario crew was gone, destroyed by the purge, destroyed by Henry Hill's cooperation, destroyed by the weight of its own crimes. The junkyard on Avenue D was seized by the government. Geffken's bar closed down. The operations that had made Vario millions were taken over by other crews, other capos. The Gambinos eventually did get access to JFK, just not in the way anyone expected. Paul Vario built an empire on hijacking and loan sharking and gambling, and he destroyed it in 6 days of senseless violence. That's his story. That's his legacy. Not the calm, dignified boss from the movies, but a killer who murdered 23 of his own people because he couldn't accept that his time was over. This is the CANARSIE bloodbath. This is what happened in August 1979. This is the truth about Paul Vario. 23 dead, most never found, most never avenged, just disappeared into the Brooklyn night, casualties of one man's pride and rage. Remember them. Remember that behind every mob story is violence and death. Remember that the glamorous portrayals hide the ugly reality. And remember Paul Vario, not as Paulie Cicero, not as the wise capo, but as the man who killed 23 people and died in prison, alone and forgotten. That's the truth. That's the story. That's what happened when Brooklyn's real Goodfellas boss decided that destruction was preferable to replacement. The CANARSIE bloodbath, August 1979, 23 dead. One capo's legacy of violence that the movies will never show you.